The rope hangs against Hacksaw Ridge like a lifeline to another world, its hemp fibers already showing the strain of 19 men who shouldn't be alive. Desmond Doss tests the knot one more time, his raw palms reading the texture like a prayer book written in blood and hope. Below, the 77th Infantry Division's aid station waits in the pre-dawn darkness, medics catching bodies that descend from a plateau that has become synonymous with the impossible. 3 hours ago, the order came down through rain-soaked foxholes. Withdraw from the ridge, regroup at the base, prepare for tomorrow's assault. The April rain on Okinawa turns every slope into a mudslide, every step into a gamble. Most of the company made it down the cliff face in organized chaos, carrying what wounded they could manage before the Japanese counterattack swept across the top like a steel typhoon. But Sergeant Martinez was screaming for his mother near the cliff's edge, both legs mangled by grenade shrapnel. Private Thompson lay unconscious beside a shattered tree, blood seeping from his scalp. 21 others were scattered across the moonscape of mud and coral, some conscious enough to moan for help, others silent in ways that made Doss's stomach clench. The other medics had retreated with the main force when enemy fire became too concentrated. Standard procedure, logical decision. But Doss couldn't follow that rope down into safety, not with voices calling from the darkness above, not when that single line of hemp, salvaged from a destroyed supply drop and barely thick enough for one man, represented the only connection between the wounded and survival. "You came back," Martinez whispers now, gripping Doss's jacket with surprising strength for a man who's lost so much blood. "They said you were crazy coming up here without a rifle, said you'd get us all killed." Doss doesn't answer, focused on wrapping field dressings around the sergeant's legs. His medical kit ran out of proper bandages an hour ago. Now he's tearing strips from his own uniform, using shoelaces as tourniquets, improvising everything while Japanese voices echo from caves somewhere below the ridge. The rain has stopped, but the air still tastes of cordite and wet limestone. The makeshift stretcher, fashioned from 2 broken rifle stocks and a torn poncho, creaks as he secures Martinez to it. Every knot becomes a small act of faith. The rope has held 19 men so far, each descent a terrifying journey through smoke and darkness, while enemy machine guns occasionally rake the cliff face. His arms burn with exhaustion, his back screams from lifting dead weight, but the hemp line endures. Private Williams proves the most challenging evacuation yet. The young soldier took shrapnel in his chest and can barely breathe, much less help with his own rescue. Doss fashions a harness from rifle slings and his own belt, testing every knot twice before dragging Williams across 30 yards of open ground. The voices from the caves grow closer, but the rope doesn't fail. As he guides Williams' stretcher over the cliff's edge, Doss realizes he's stopped counting the number of times he's whispered the same prayer. The words have become as automatic as breathing, as necessary as the hemp fibers that scrape against limestone with each careful descent. Below, soldiers gather to catch the wounded, their faces pale in the darkness as they witness something that defies every tactical manual they've ever studied. The rope trembles under Williams's weight, compressed fibers stretching beyond their intended limits. But it holds. It always holds, though Doss can see sections where shrapnel has nicked the strands, where constant use has worn the hemp thin as a spider's web. Each successful lowering feels like a prayer answered, each return to the cliff's edge a test of faith measured in hemp and hope. When Williams finally touches solid ground and the quiet cheer rises from the aid station below, Doss allows himself one moment to stare up at the stars, barely visible through the smoke. Thompson is still up there, unconscious but breathing. Still alive if the rope holds for just one more journey down the face of Hacksaw Ridge. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation, and stay with us for the next chapters. The descent with Thompson feels endless. Doss has saved the unconscious soldier for last because moving him requires the most strength, and he wasn't sure his exhausted body could manage another trip to the cliff's edge. But the rope that has carried 22 men through the darkness will carry one more. It has to. Thompson's stretcher bumps against the limestone face as they descend inch by inch. Doss's own body pressed against the rock, while enemy fire occasionally sparks overhead. The rope cuts deeper into his palms with each foot of progress, the hemp fibers leaving their signature burned into his flesh. Below, medics wait with their arms outstretched, ready to guide the final wounded man to safety. The 77th Infantry Division's aid station has become a study in controlled chaos, Doctor. Patterson works by lantern light under a canvas tarp, his hands moving with the mechanical precision of a man who has learned to see bodies as puzzles to be solved rather than lives hanging in the balance. When Thompson's stretcher finally reaches the bottom, Patterson barely looks up from the chest wound he's treating. "That's 23, someone says quietly. 23 men down from that ridge. The medic's still up there," adds another voice. "Going to need that rope himself if he expects to see morning." Doss hears their conversation as he prepares for his own descent, but the words feel distant, unreal. The number 23 will be recorded in official reports, typed into after-action summaries, perhaps mentioned in letters home to families who will never fully understand what those digits represent. Up here, on this blood-soaked plateau above Okinawa, numbers feel meaningless. Each evacuation has been its own small miracle, its own test of hemp and faith. Private Johnson, the first man down, had been unconscious from blood loss, but woke up halfway through the descent, gripping the rope with both hands. Corporal Davis had tried to crack jokes during his journey to the bottom, his voice tight with pain and disbelief. Sergeant Rodriguez had spent the entire lowering praying in Spanish, his words mixing with Doss's own whispered petitions. The rope itself has become something more than equipment. Every strand carries the weight of 23 lives. Every fiber tells the story of a night when one man's refusal to abandon the wounded turned a simple tool into something sacred. As Doss checks the knots one final time, he notices how the hemp has changed during these hours of use, compressed, stretched, darkened with blood and rain, worn smooth in places where it scraped against the cliff's edge. Captain Glover appears at the base of the ridge, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that might be awe. He's been watching from the aid station as body after body descended from the darkness above, each one guided down by the same rope, the same steady hands. "Doss," he calls up through cupped hands. "Time to come down. That's an order." The words echo off the limestone face, clear and direct. Standard military protocol. The wounded have been evacuated. The mission is complete, and no man should remain alone on a ridge held by the enemy. But as Doss prepares to rappel down that faithful rope for the last time, he can't shake the feeling that he's leaving something behind on Hacksaw Ridge. Something more than just blood and bandages. His hands find their familiar grip on the hemp line, muscles remembering the weight and texture that has defined this longest night of his life. The rope sways gently in the pre-dawn breeze. Its work finally complete. 23 men who should have died on that ridge are alive because of hemp and faith and the kind of stubborn courage that defies military logic. As his boots finally touch earth and soldiers gather around him with handshakes and quiet praise, Doss can only stare back up at Hacksaw Ridge, now shrouded in darkness and smoke. The rope hangs limp against the cliff face, a simple tool transformed into something sacred through necessity and desperate hope. The rope still burns in Desmond's dreams 2 weeks later, even though his hands have healed and the 77th Infantry Division has moved to a different sector of Okinawa. He wakes in his foxhole before dawn, fingers automatically flexing as if testing hemp fibers that aren't there, muscle memory more persistent than conscious thought. Private Jensen sits nearby, cleaning his rifle with the methodical attention of a man who's seen what happens when weapons jam at the wrong moment. He's been watching Doss with something between respect and unease ever since Hacksaw Ridge. The way you might watch someone who's walked through fire and emerged unchanged on the surface, but carrying something different underneath. How many times you figure you went up and down that cliff? Jensen asks quietly, not looking up from his rifle. I keep hearing different numbers from different guys. Doesn't matter, Doss replies, though the question hits deeper than he'd like to admit. The official count says 23 men evacuated, but the memory feels larger and smaller than that at the same time. Larger because each descent took forever, smaller because the whole night compressed into moments of rope and prayer, and the sound of wounded men breathing. The rain starts again, the April weather on Okinawa as unpredictable as enemy mortars. Doss pulls his poncho tighter and thinks about how water changes the texture of hemp, makes it heavier and more likely to slip. During the evacuation, he'd worried more about the rain than the enemy fire. Bullets were random, but wet rope was a certainty that could kill just as effectively. Lieutenant Morrison approaches through the pre-dawn gloom, his boots squelching in the mud that seems to follow the 77th Infantry everywhere they move on this island. He's carrying a piece of paper that looks official, the kind of document that turns actions into words and words into history. Division wants a full report on the hacksaw action, he says, settling into the foxhole. Your name's coming up for some kind of citation, Medal of Honor maybe. The words hang in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Doss has heard rumors about decorations, about paperwork being processed somewhere up the chain of command. But the idea of reducing that night to a citation feels strange, like trying to capture the ocean in a canteen cup. I just did what anyone would do, he says finally. Jensen snorts softly. Anyone with a rope and no sense of self-preservation, maybe. The conversation drifts to other things, when they might get hot chow, whether the Japanese positions in this sector are as heavily fortified as Hacksaw had been, how much longer the war might last. But Doss finds his attention wandering back to the rope, to the way it had felt alive in his hands during those crucial hours. Dr. Patterson appears at the foxhole's edge like a ghost materializing from the rain. He's been treating the wounded from Hacksaw Ridge, watching 23 men who shouldn't be alive slowly heal in the division's field hospital. His presence here, away from his usual aid station duties, suggests something more than a routine check. The men you brought down, Patterson says without preamble. Williams is going to make it, full recovery probably. Rodriguez too. Martinez, he'll walk again, eventually. The medical update should feel like a victory, and part of it does. But Doss also hears what Patterson doesn't say, that some of those 23 men will carry pieces of Hacksaw Ridge with them for the rest of their lives, just as he carries the memory of hemp rope burning through his palms. They keep asking about you, Patterson continues. Want to know if you're real, or if they dreamed the whole thing. A man with no weapon, going back up that cliff over and over again. Thunder rolls across the Okinawan hills, and Doss thinks about sound, how it carries differently at night, how the voices of wounded men can cut through artillery fire, but disappear completely in the silence afterward. Sometimes he still hears them calling, even when he's sure he's alone. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. The rope becomes everything during the deepest part of that night, when Doss realizes he's moved beyond following orders or even conscious decision-making into something closer to pure instinct. His hands know the hemp fibers better than his own heartbeat, can read the stress patterns, and wear points in the darkness like a blind man reading scripture. Martinez is delirious when Doss reaches him the second time, calling for his sister in rapid Spanish while blood soaks through the field dressings. The makeshift stretcher, those 2 rifle stocks and torn poncho, seems impossibly fragile for a man who's lost so much and still clings to consciousness through sheer stubborn will. I can't feel my legs, Martinez whispers as Doss secures the straps. They're gone, aren't they? They're there. Doss lies gently, though he can see the damage even in the darkness. You're going home, Sergeant. You're going to see your family again. The lie feels necessary, even sacred. Truth can wait for daylight and proper medical facilities and doctors who have more than torn uniforms and rifle slings to work with. Right now, hope matters more than honesty, and hope travels down the rope one wounded man at a time. Thompson remains unconscious when Doss finally reaches him, which might be a mercy. The private's breathing is shallow but steady, his pulse weak but persistent. Moving an unconscious man requires a different kind of stretcher work, more complex knots, more trust in hemp fibers that have already carried 18 other soldiers to safety. The descent with Thompson becomes a meditation on faith, made tangible. Every foot of progress represents another moment when the rope doesn't snap, when the knots hold, when the limestone cliff face doesn't crumble under the weight of two men who have no business trusting their lives to salvaged hemp and improvised stretchers. Halfway down, enemy fire erupts from the caves below the ridge. Muzzle flashes light up the cliff face like deadly fireflies, bullets sparking off limestone inches from the rope. Doss presses himself against the rock, shielding Thompson's unconscious form with his own body, while tracers paint geometric patterns in the darkness above Okinawa. The rope vibrates with each impact, hemp fibers singing under tension that goes beyond anything they were designed to handle, but it holds. In that moment, suspended between earth and sky while bullets search for their flesh, Doss understands that he's witnessing something that will never fit neatly into an after-action report. "Please, Lord," he whispers, for what must be the 100th time. Just let it hold. The prayer has become automatic, as necessary as breathing. Each descent requires the same leap of faith, the same trust in equipment that grows more fragile with every use. The rope shows its strain now, fibers separating, wear patterns developing where it scrapes against the cliff's edge, dark stains that might be blood, or might just be the accumulated weight of impossible journeys. When Thompson's stretcher finally touches solid ground and the medics rush forward to receive him, a quiet cheer rises from the aid station. Not celebration exactly, but the sound men make when they've witnessed something that challenges everything they thought they knew about courage and equipment and the mathematics of survival. Captain Glover appears in the circle of lantern light, his face a mixture of admiration and disbelief. He's been watching the evacuation from below, counting bodies that shouldn't be alive, trying to reconcile what he's seeing with every tactical principle he's ever learned. "That's all of them," he calls up to Doss. 23 men down. Time for you to follow that rope to safety." But Doss remains at the cliff's edge for another moment, his hands still gripping the hemp line that has become his connection to something larger than military procedure or personal survival. The rope sways in the night breeze, its work finally complete, but its meaning just beginning to settle into the memories of everyone who witnessed its impossible burden. The secret that Doss never shares with the medal committees or the newspaper reporters who will later transform this night into legend is how close he came to snapping that rope himself. Not accidentally, deliberately. Standing at the cliff's edge with Thompson's stretcher secured and ready for the final descent, his exhausted mind had whispered that one quick cut would end the responsibility, the weight, the impossible choice between his own survival and one more wounded man calling from the darkness. His hands had actually reached for his medical knife, the blade already reflecting starlight before his conscious mind caught up with the impulse. For perhaps 30 seconds, an eternity measured in hemp fibers and human breath, Desmond Doss had understood why some men break under the weight of other men's lives. The moment passed. The knife went back into its sheath. Thompson descended safely into waiting arms, but that half-minute of doubt will follow Doss for the rest of his life, surfacing in dreams and quiet moments when his hands remember the texture of rope and the weight of steel. Now 3 weeks later, and safely away from Hacksaw Ridge, he sits in a field hospital tent while Major Harrison reads through the preliminary citation paperwork. The words sound clean and heroic. Single-handedly evacuated wounded personnel, Extraordinary courage under fire, devotion to duty beyond the call, no mention of trembling hands or whispered doubts, or the moment when faith almost became too heavy to carry. "The division commander wants to put you in for the Medal of Honor," Harrison says, setting down the papers. "First conscientious objector to receive it, if it goes through. That'll make some headlines." Through the tent flaps, Doss can see soldiers from the 77th Infantry moving equipment, preparing for their next assignment. Some of them nod when they see him, their faces carrying the particular respect men reserve for someone who's done something they can't quite understand. Others look away, uncomfortable with heroism that doesn't fit familiar patterns. Private Williams appears at the tent opening, moving slowly, but under his own power. The chest wound has healed enough for him to return to light duties, though Dr. Patterson estimates he'll carry shrapnel for the rest of his life. He's one of the 23, his survival measured in hemp and hope and midnight prayers. "Wanted to thank you," Williams says simply, "for coming back." The words should feel good, but they don't. They feel heavy instead, weighted with implications that stretch far beyond one night on Okinawa. Every thank you carries the same burden. The knowledge that Doss will spend the rest of his life being defined by a handful of hours when everything that mattered could be measured in rope strength and the distance between cliff edge and solid ground. "How do you do it?" Williams asks. "Go into those places without even carrying a rifle?" It's the question everyone wants to ask, but few have the courage to voice. How do you walk into a killing field armed only with bandages and faith? How do you climb back up that rope when every instinct screams for safety? "Same way the rope held," Doss says finally. "One strand at a time, one foot at a time, one prayer at a time." Williams nods as if this makes perfect sense, though Doss knows the answer is incomplete. The full truth includes moments of doubt, instances of fear so pure it becomes a kind of prayer itself, and the terrible mathematics of deciding who to save first when everyone is dying. The official report will describe the evacuation in clean military language: objectives achieved, personnel rescued, mission accomplished. But reports can't capture the sound hemp makes under maximum stress, or the way a man's breathing changes when he realizes he's going to live after all, or the weight of carrying other people's survival in hands that shake when no one is watching. That night, alone in his foxhole while the 77th Infantry prepares for tomorrow's operations, Doss dreams of rope again. But this time, the hemp speaks with the voices of 23 men who shouldn't be alive, each strand carrying their words into a future none of them expected to see. 47 years after Hacksaw Ridge, Desmond Doss sits on his front porch in Alabama, watching rain drip from the eaves while his granddaughter reads his Medal of Honor citation for a school report. The words sound strange in her young voice. Heroism translated into official language, legend distilled into paragraphs suitable for textbooks and ceremonies. "Grandpa," she asks, looking up from the paper, "what did the rope actually feel like?" The question stops him cold. In nearly 5 decades of interviews, speeches and commemoration ceremonies, no one has ever asked about the texture of hemp against his palms, the way salvaged rope could carry the weight of 23 lives and somehow not break. "Like holding on to someone's heartbeat," he says finally. "Like faith made out of something you could touch." The girl nods seriously, making notes in the margins of her report. She's 12. The same age his grandson Thompson, named for the unconscious private who made the final descent, was when Doss first tried to explain why some memories feel heavier than others. Jensen visits sometimes, the only other living man who witnessed the entire evacuation from below. He's retired now, his hands still steady despite the arthritis that comes from years of gripping rifles and equipment in Pacific rain. They don't talk much about Okinawa, but they understand each other's silences, the way certain sounds, helicopters, ropes under tension, men breathing hard, can transport them instantly back to April 1945. The official history of the 77th Infantry Division devotes 3 paragraphs to the Hacksaw Ridge action, mentioning the rope only in passing as improvised evacuation equipment. But Doss knows that rope continued working long after that night, became part of division folklore, was copied and improved, and eventually standardized into military doctrine about vertical evacuation under fire. Dr. Patterson had tracked him down in the 1970s, wanting to understand the medical side of what happened on the ridge. 23 men evacuated, he'd said, and 22 of them lived to go home. Those odds defied every statistical model for combat medicine, especially given the improvised nature of the stretchers and the conditions under which they'd been used. "What I never understood," Patterson had said, "was how you knew the rope would hold. No stress testing, no engineering calculations, just hemp and hope. Same way you know anything important," Doss had replied. "You trust it until it proves you wrong." The rain intensifies, drumming against the roof with a sound that always carries him back to Okinawa, to limestone cliffs and darkness, and the sensation of hemp fibers stretching beyond their intended limits. His hands remember everything, the knots, the weight, the moment when faith becomes tangible enough to lower a man to safety. His granddaughter finishes reading the citation and looks up expectantly, waiting for the kind of wisdom that grandfathers are supposed to provide. But Doss finds himself thinking instead about Williams, who lived another 43 years after Hacksaw Ridge, raised 5 children, and sent Christmas cards that always mentioned the rope. About Martinez, who learned to walk again and became a teacher, spending his life helping other people find their footing. "The thing about that rope," he tells her finally, "is that it was never really about the rope. It was about the hands holding it and the men trusting their weight to it, and the belief that sometimes impossible things happen when you refuse to let go." The girl writes this down carefully, though Doss knows that the real lesson can't be captured in school reports any more than it could be captured in military citations. The truth lives in the space between legend and memory, in the understanding that heroism isn't something you choose so much as something you discover when everything else has been stripped away. As evening settles over Alabama and his granddaughter heads inside to finish her homework, Doss remains on the porch, listening to rain and remembering hemp. Somewhere in his mind, that rope still hangs against Hacksaw Ridge, still carries the weight of 23 lives, still represents the moment when faith became strong enough to lower broken men to safety, one prayer at a time. If this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.